Before I begin this story, I want to let you know that in the middle part of the story, there is a response to the post from OPP's son, which explains a lot. So please be sure to read the entire story in order to understand that what OPP did was really wrong, and that after my husband found out that I was cheating on him with my boss and went to jail for assault, he ruined my perfect family. I'm a selfish person, at least that's what I tell myself over and over again. Almost every night when I hear silence in my house. My husband hates me, my immediate family is divided, and I never stop hating myself for what I did. My ex-husband told me I was beautiful every day, always wanted to have sex with me, always took care of me, treated me as his equal. He never treated me like a queen or a princess. I was his partner. We were married for 20 years when we were high school sweethearts and were each other's only one. It felt good. My family loved him, my brother looked up to him, and my ex helped him through a lot. My ex was the one people called when they were in trouble, and he helped them. Our fights were always few and far between. We talked everything out, but when we did, it was usually about my sex life or the things I refused to do. I spent a whole year at the gym doing yoga and Pilates, and my efforts brought my weight down from 180 pounds to 135 pounds, which was an amazing transformation for me. My ex-husband also went to the gym with me, but not as much as I did. But he went from 260 pounds to 225 pounds and started to shape up. My ex couldn't keep his hands off me, but for some reason I still wasn't in the mood, and it's not like he didn't try. We went out to dinner, danced, went for regular walks. He was always there to help around the house, and I could see it in his eyes how much he loved me and how much he desired me. I'm sure any woman would crave his love, but I wasn't in the best of spirits at the time. I thought I was going through early menopause because we only had sex 3 times a month and I was just a one-off, but he wanted more, and no matter how hard he tried, I just wasn't into it. He mentioned couples counseling, but I refused, so now my selfishness is kicking in. A few days after my birthday, a new manager came into my office. Then he started flirting and I showed him my ring. However, after 2 months of constant flirting, I flirted back, which led to me telling him about my life, and I found myself thinking about him more and more. We got into a heated argument about it, and I really think he started kissing me. I subconsciously looked disgusted, but it wasn't directed at my ex. When he leaned in, I was thinking about this man, or at least I was disgusted by the whole thing. A week after that day, I told the new manager to meet me at a cafe so we could talk. I was hell-bent on keeping this man away from me and telling him I couldn't do that. During that time, I did what my ex wanted with this man. I craved it more. I was more willing. I was always aroused. I believe it was because it was something new. My ex and I did have sex during this time, but not as often. I started pushing him away, blowing up at his little habits. I even degraded him. I realized what I was doing when my brother came to visit me. He told me that my ex had confided in him that he was depressed and was going to file for separation. He said that he felt that I didn't love him anymore and that he was starting to not love me. So I immediately annulled the engagement, quit my job, and told myself that I needed to make my husband feel my love for him, that I needed to fix this, that I needed to be a better wife if I could. I told him I needed to fix my marriage. I told him to leave. He wanted one last time. I told him no. He pleaded with me, and like a fool, I agreed. We went to the guest room, and we did it. I don't know how long we did it for, but as he pressed up against me, I felt him jerk back, and there was a loud thud, and I sat up, and my ex looked at me, and my ex looked at me. My ex-boyfriend 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 looked at me. I tried to say something to my ex, but his eyes were bloodshot. Tears were streaming down his face. His lips were quivering. I could tell he was in a lot of pain, and I felt so sick. I watched as my ex stood up and tried to leave. My assistant told him that if he knew what was good for him, he would back off, so my ex attacked him. I screamed and cried for my ex to stop, and out of desperation, I jumped on his back and I ended up on the floor. All I could do was stare at my ex-boyfriend's swollen face and the blood from his teeth on the floor next to him. I soon learned that he had called the police himself, Everything was a mess in the hospital. My father didn't say a word to me. He just looked at me in shame. My brother was screaming at me with a devastated look on his face, asking me, how could I do this to my ex? My mother was comforting me, telling me it was okay. I went to my boys. They refused to talk to me. My sons couldn't even look at me. My ex was badly injured and needed to have plastic surgery on his face. A woman came into my room and immediately attacked me. My brother pulled her off of me, and it turned out she was my ex-husband's wife. I didn't know he was married. He never wore a ring and never said a word. My daughter refused to talk to me, and my ex didn't want to see me. I tried to visit him in the county, but was denied. My brother made sure my ex went to the correctional facility where he worked so he could watch him. It was the first time I had seen him in months. He looked at me with anger in his eyes, and it broke my heart more than anything I could have imagined. He always looked at me with love in his eyes, even when we were angry with each other. During my ex-husband's testimony, I learned that he came home and surprised me with a lunch and a weekend trip for 2 to the Catskills. He heard the recording in court, heard the pain in his voice, heard him sobbing as he did what the operator told him to do, and it was all too shocking for my ex to testify orally. My ex broke his eye socket, his cheekbones, destroyed his jaw. They said the bone fragments were too small to put together. My ex was charged with a 3rd-degree felony and sentenced to 7 years in prison, which caused my sons to scream in protest, my daughters and his family to make a wail of a call that still haunts me. The first 3 months were torturous. I was sued by my former ex-wife for alienating their relationship. My father and brother refused to speak to me after his mother spat in my face when I tried to apologize to her. Eventually, I needed to find a new job because there was no money coming in, and I had spent almost all my savings, but I was almost blacklisted in my field, which was bad news for accounting firms, so I started working in retail as a seasonal laborer. I almost lost my house. My ex-husband wouldn't allow me to visit him. Every letter was returned. Crying in the shower became almost routine. My parents were almost separated because my mother was constantly defending me. My brother refused to acknowledge me, and even my friends that I had known since elementary school ignored me. Soon I began to have thoughts of ending it all, of picking up my things and disappearing. The guilt was too much. I took him for granted, and almost a year went by, and my kids stayed silent for a year, and when I'd make dinner, they'd pack up their food and go to their room, refusing to even look at me. My brother got married, and I wasn't invited, but my kids were. I continued to try to visit my ex-husband in hopes that he would put me on the list of visitors, but I was always denied, and my letters were still returned. This was the first time he came to my house since the trial, and he just came to yell at me and tell me that my ex went into the infirmary after being stabbed, and an inmate tried to sexually assault him in his cell, which resulted in my ex being stabbed in the stomach and the inmate getting a broken spine. I cried for days afterward because he was right. I did it. I tried to visit him in the infirmary but was denied for another 4 years. I tried to talk to him and wrote letters to him, but they all came back. Thankfully, our children visit their father regularly, and I realized that he had been placed in protective custody by my brother ever since he was attacked. Over the years, my oldest son went to the same college my ex-husband attended and even took the same major. He only calls his siblings, never wants to talk to me, and never comes to the house on vacations, only goes to his grandparents' house. Still, my brother and I rarely spoke, and after they had their first child, I tried to visit his wife, but I was asked to leave. Earlier this year, in May, my boys were happy that my sons came home. I don't know why, and I don't care. They stayed home for 4 months. My boys were all around me, and I did my best to show them how sorry I was, but I was mostly ignored. But they talked to me, and that made me happy to talk to them and know what was going on in their lives. My oldest has been dating a woman for over a year. My oldest is on the college track team, and even my daughters are starting to talk to me. And it makes me hate myself even more to see them laughing and eating dinner together again. I expressed my excitement for their birthday party and told them my plans, and my daughters didn't hesitate to ask me if we could have the party on another day, which confused me because I thought we were starting to get better. I cried because he was out of jail, which made me even sadder because he was out of jail and they were spending more time around me. They were happier and more joyful because they had their father in their lives again. I asked him where he lived, and they told me he lived with my brother. I tried to call him, and I tried to talk to him, but he refused. He coldly told me, "You forgot this." I cried as I watched his back as he left. I pleaded with him to talk to me, but he walked back into the house. In that moment, I realized that my kids were just tolerating me, but I still wanted to undo this. I wanted to tell them how selfish I was. I wanted to tell him how much I missed him and how sorry I was for ruining our relationship, so I still tried to go about my daily life. I really don't care. I just want him to forgive me. I want him to talk to me. I want him to be there for me. I want him to look at me the way he used to, and I want my kids to be there for us. I'm selfish, and I wish I could take it all back. This is a response to my mother's post, "My selfishness is ruining my family," on Support the Wayward. I'm a regular on Reddit, so I use the word throwaway because I really don't want anyone I know in my social life to know that this is who I am. My college friends didn't know that my father had served time in prison, and I didn't want to tell them. So when I was walking around campus, I heard a lot of people talking about and sharing this post, and it reminded me of a lot of emotions that I've been trying to work through. I went to my father and told him what I did, and he yelled at me. My father is a good man, and he just yelled at me for cussing, and my mother told me that I may not love my mother, but I need to respect her. He told us that's how he was in the South Bronx, and my aunts told us that he joined a gang when he was 13 years old, just so that he wouldn't be bothered when he was in school, 15 years old. His father died of cancer, and my father had to become a surrogate parent for his two younger sisters because there was no life insurance, and he had to work and do what he had to do to help pay for the rent and food on the table while still going to school. My uncle told me that he and his friends thought my dad was weird. It was the 90s, and my dad walked into school wearing baggy clothes and a Puerto Rican flag shirt, and they decided to have their way with him. My dad picked him up and asked him if he wanted to skip school and go to the 40 to talk about it. My uncle said that when my dad did that, he knew they were going to be friends, and they started hanging out. Growing up, my parents were a loving couple, and they were always holding hands and kissing. And it was so embarrassing to me that even at the beginning of my senior year of high school, when everything changed, he was acting in front of my mom like a teenager. He loved her and respected her. I can honestly say he never put her on a pedestal. He would say to me that a woman will not respect a man who puts them on a pedestal. When I asked him why, he said, "Because they will always look down on you." My dad told me that his father and stepdad thought the same way. You need to treat your wife as your equal. She's your best friend. She's your confidant. As much as you are hers, she's your best friend. She's your confidant, just like you're hers. My dad had his quirks too. He was a big guy, always joking, 5'11", 260 pounds. Despite being heavy, he was very active. He would occasionally write her love letters, defend her honor when someone was rude or disrespectful to her, and always told her how beautiful she was. My dad was always there for him, even though everyone thought he was a loser. My dad never gave up on him. Like my grandfather said, knock off his stupidity and leave the man he was supposed to be. That always made me laugh. My dad showed me how a man, a friend, and a husband was supposed to act. My mom was in love with my dad until her affair. He was always there for her, encouraged her. He was her moral support when she was down. She was the moral support for all of us. They had the marriage we wanted, and then my mom died. I remember those months when she spoke to my father as if he was beneath her. My father fought back, but he restrained himself. Even though my father graduated from college and made a successful career as a financial advisor, he was able to go from zero to slumming in 5 seconds. Grandma said he was kind and helpful like his father, but also wouldn't hesitate to rip your throat out with his bare hands. But Dad would smile and tell us that they'd work it out. He'd tell us that Mom was probably stressed out at work and bringing the stress into the house, and I believed that, especially when she quit her job, I really thought it was her job that was the problem, and then Dad got Mom. Do you know how embarrassed we were when the whole school was talking about it? My dad was arrested because my mom couldn't keep her legs closed when I went to see my dad. He couldn't bear to look at me. He was so ashamed. He told me he wasn't doing his duty as a husband. As a man, I told him he wasn't. But he said he was, because a man thinks about the consequences of his actions before he does something so stupid. He wasn't doing his duty as a husband because his wife is another man. And it told him to please look at me, and he wouldn't. And then you had the audacity to ask for forgiveness, and for the first time in my life I wanted to hurt you, and listening to my father crying to the operator and telling that woman that he thinks she killed someone, and listening to that woman talk to him and listening to him say over and over and over again that the love of my life cheated on me, mean that it hurt us more than anything. And you telling everyone how long you were with that asshole. And that's why we're all here. How long you were with that asshole. That's why we lost him. That's why he was sent to jail. I'm sure if we had a real lawyer instead of an appointed one, he would have been fine. You didn't notice. You just wanted to try and make things right with Dad, leaving me alone to take care of my younger siblings. I don't know why you try to make it seem like you're on your own, Mom. I know it's hard. I know you're frustrated, but you've got other people to help you pay your bills. Grandma did defend you, but she only did it because everyone was against you. At least that's what the twins thought. I almost had a nervous breakdown when Dad got stabbed. I had just met him that day, and I was making fun of how muscular he was. And we had a good laugh about what Dad said about the prison body program, and we had a good laugh about it. He made it sound like a funny commercial. I was halfway back to school when I got the call, and I almost crashed my car because my brain was broken. It was hard on everyone. I didn't tell anyone, but I was sitting outside the apartment in the sob, and I wanted him up so bad. But when I saw him walking on crutches, I remembered what Dad said and drove away. The damage you did to all of us was immense, and you kept asking us to forgive you and give you another chance. And it didn't help, and you never gave us the space to understand and heal, and you just kept asking to be told that you were a good mom to us, and so we should respect you, and so we did, and that made you happy for a while. And I can remember what it felt like not to hate you. And Dad had a hard time finding a job at first. But one of his old clients hired him. She's been coming to see Dad every week for over 3 years now, and they've been together since he got out of prison. So please stop building castles in the sky for you two to get back together. If you want to talk about it, call me. If you want to patch things up with your kids, call me. What you did last week was arguably the worst moment of our lives, as your title says, is purely self-serving.